All right, I'm back, guys. I had to take a little break. This is a very near and dear to my heart and soul video. So, I am working on the millennial generation. And this video specifically goes out to you. I'm not going to name names. I'm still have your dog tag, my friend. I still hold you in my prayers. And you know who you are. I refuse to name names, but yeah. So this section goes deep into my early teenage years. Many of my very, very, very close friends were in the military. I literally dug through my old college paperwork. I had taken criminal justice. I bounced around. I had to get my old college criminal justice book out. I don't know if you can even see that, but yeah, 2008 college courses. Fighting with professors. I absolutely loved it. I have this literally is an old binder from my chemistry class in high school. I still have it. But it's full of college papers that I researched. I don't even know if you can hear me. I'm so excited to be doing this video. I studied a lot on the war, Iraq war, VA. Literally still have all of my college. I still have all of my college papers. This is just really closing some research I've done a long time ago. So, yeah, I had to go back in time and see what I thought back then compared to now and do more research. And I have yet to change my mind. When I get into researching something, I go very, very deep. And I haven't changed my mind on my conclusions. And I'm pretty happy to be sharing that information here. So, I'm gonna make this video smaller here and get back into the book. Millennials. All right, so we are in the war and global threat pillar. Historically, I am going through the history first, and then I will be getting into the astrological portion of the millennial generation. All right, so war and global threat. Historical conditions. The generation raised inside a permanent threat. Millennials were the first generation raised under continuous global threat without resolution. Previous generations experienced war as time bound, geographically distant, morally framed, and narratively resolved. Millennials experienced war as endless, invisible, but omnipresent, morally incoherent, unresolved by design. There was no after, there was only during. Millennials were the first mass media generation raised under continuous global threat without resolution. Previous generations experienced war as time bound, geographically distant, morally framed, and narratively resolved. Millennials experienced war as endless and visible. Did I just say all of that? I accidentally double doubled up on that. My bad. So anyways, moving on. All right, so there was no after, there was only during. I'm going to have to correct that before I upload it. All right, so the psychological shift from war events to war atmosphere. Millennials did not grow up with war stories. They grew up inside a war atmosphere. Key defining features. We are the 9/11 generation. I believe, 12 years old when 9/11 happened in 2001. 9/11 as a collective psychic rupture. Nonstop media replay of collapse and terror, color-coded threat levels, airport militarization, surveillance normalized as safety, language of fear embedded into daily life. War became background radiation. Not something that happened over there, but something that could happen anywhere at any time. This rewired the millennial nervous system. The war on terror, an enemy without a face. The enemy millennials were taught to fear was undefined, everywhere, impossible to defeat, and constantly shifting. This created chronic vigilance, moral confusion, distrust of official narratives. If you want to know why the millennial generation is absolutely crazy with researching, this is why. Inability to locate safety externally. There was no victory condition, no clear moral arc, and no endpoint. Instead, fear became the organizing principle. This trained millennials to question motives, distrust certainty, resist black and white thinking, perceive power as manipulation rather than protection. Indigenous and ancestral echoes, the unspoken layer. For indigenous peoples and descendants of colonized populations, millennials inherited layered war trauma. Occupation disguised as security, historical violence reframed as progress, erased genocide mirrored by modern imperialism, land based trauma resurfacing through global conflict. Millennials intuitively recognized this war feels familiar because it never actually ended. The war on terror activated ancestral memory of invasion, of displacement, of spiritual rupture, of authority cloaked in righteousness. This deepened millennial resistance to imperial narratives and nationalist myth making. War without participation, guilt without agency. Unlike earlier generations, millennials were not broadly drafted, not uniformly enlisted, not collectively mobilized. Yet they were psychologically conscripted, emotionally implicated, and economically burdened. They inherited war debt, veteran trauma. I hold that so close to my heart. I saw it. I kept in contact with Marines in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars before, during, and after. I hold that so close to my heart. Moral fallout and geopolitical instability without having chosen the war. This product produced a unique imprint. Survivor's guilt without heroism, responsibility without agency, fear without action, and outrage without leverage. Technology as a war delivery system. Millennials were the first generation to experience war through live video, 24/7 news cycles, internet radicalization, algorithmic fear amplification, and social media shock loops. War became consumable, clickable, monetized, and emotionally numbing. Repeated exposure created disassociation, dark humor, emotional flattening, and ironic detachment as survival strategy. This is not apathy, it is protective desensitization. Masculinity, war, and the collapse of the warrior archetype. For millennial men, especially, the warrior archetype collapsed. Heroism was replaced with futility, strength was reframed as aggression, and protection became suspect. They were told war is immoral, violence is toxic, masculinity is dangerous, yet safety still requires force. This contradiction fractured masculine identity. Guilt for aggression, shame for strength, paralysis around assertion, and withdrawal from protector roles. Polarity destabilization began here, not in relationships. Feminine hyper-vigilance and emotional labor. Millennial women absorbed war differently. Heightened threat perception, increased responsibility for emotional regulation, Safety consciousness extended into relationships and parenting. The feminine became vigilant, protective, anticipatory, and burdened with foresight. This laid groundwork for anxiety disorders, hyperindependence, mistrust of male protection, and maternal overfunctioning. War, authority, collapse, and relationship fracture the chain. War taught millennials authority lies, safety is conditional, power protects itself, and truth is curated. This directly fed into rejection of traditional authority, skepticism towards marriage and institutions, fear based attachment patterns, and parenting centered on emotional safety over obedience. War did not end, it migrated inward. The core millennial war imprint. Millennials internalize this belief. If danger is constant, then safety must be internal. This is why they distrust external saviors, seek inner sovereignty, reject blind loyalty, resist coerced systems, and build quiet, parallel structures instead of revolutions. They are not anti peace, they are post illusion. The timeline of betrayal, 1999 through 2012. How trust in authority collapsed in real time. Millennial distrust of authority did not emerge from ideology. It emerged from repeated empirical contradiction. We were taught one story and we watched another unfold. 1999 through 2000, Y2K and the first cracks in technological authority. Y2K, does anyone remember? I remember as a family, I have an aunt and uncle that moved to the big city of Chicago, and they ended up coming home to the farm, and we were all eating Chinese, waiting for our computers to absolutely crash. It's funny. So Y2K, January 1st, 2000, was the first mass-scale threat millennials witnessed that was framed as catastrophic, involved government, corporations, and media, ultimately fizzled without transparency. What millennials absorbed wasn't technology saved us, it was they don't actually know what they are doing, and they exaggerated threats to maintain control. This planted an early seed. Authority can manufacture panic. Expert certainty can be performative. Behind the scenes, systems are fragile. This primed millennials to question future crisis narratives rather than accept them. September 11th, 2001, the psychic break point. Do you remember where you were when this happened? I know exactly where I was. I was riding the bus. Wild. Comment below if you remember exactly what you were doing when this happened. 9/11 was not just an attack, it was the moment trust fractured at scale. Key realities millennials noticed in real time. NORAD failed on the most surveilled airspace in the world. The Pentagon, the most secured military building, was hit. Intelligence agencies missed obvious warning signs. Emergency powers expanded immediately and permanently. Then came the messaging. Everything changed. Trust us. We need secrecy for your safety. But millennials saw evidence locked away, questions labeled unpatriotic, whistleblowers silenced, wars launched without clear casualty. This was the moment millennials learned authority does not equal truth, it equals narrative control. I kept all of the newspaper clippings from 9/11. I made a huge book out of them, and I researched that vigorously for years on end. Yeah, it was certainly a moment in my own psychological development. 2001 to 2002. The Patriotic Act and surveillance normalization. Within weeks of 9/11, the Patriotic Act passed with minimal public scrutiny. Civil liberties were quickly rolled back. Surveillance was reframed as protection. Dissent was morally stigmatized. Millennials internalized privacy is conditional, rights can be suspended indefinitely, and fear is a political tool. This trained an entire generation to read fine print, distrust emergency legislation, assume power expands during crisis, and never retracts. 2001 through 2021. Afghanistan, the forever war. Afghanistan became the longest war in history. Millennials watched goals constantly change, victory endlessly postponed, media interests fade while casualties continued, no measurable success criteria. And critically, millennials personally knew soldiers, classmates enlisted, friends came home altered, injured, and disillusioned. They reported, I'm going to say this because I personally know people. They reported guarding poppy fields, protecting drug routes, following orders with no moral clarity. This shattered the myth of noble sacrifice, clear missions, and righteous intervention. The war ended exactly where it began after 20 years, confirming millennial suspicion. This was never about safety. 2003 Iraq War, the lie that cemented distrust. The Iraq War was the point of no return for millennial faith in government. Key facts millennials watched unravel. Weapons of mass destruction were the justification. The evidence was fabricated or manipulated. Intelligence agencies knowingly misled the public. Media complied. When WMDs were found, no one was held accountable. This taught millennials intelligence agencies lie. Media amplifies power. Consequences are asymmetric. Truth arises after the damage is already done. This is when millennials stopped asking, "What should I believe?" and started asking, "Who benefits?" Follow the money, as we like to say. 2004 through 2010, veterans return to nothing. Yes. I still have my research papers. It is absolutely wild. Wild to me. I was so upset and continue to be so. Millennials watched peers come home psychologically shattered, addicted to prescription painkillers, untreated for PTSD, waiting months or years for care. Key realities: VA waitlists were catastrophic. Mental health resources were insufficient. Veterans were criminalized instead of treated. Opioids were overprescribed, then blamed on users. This collided with the opioid epidemic, revealing pharmaceutical corruption, regulatory capture, and profit prioritized over human life. Millennials learned the state will use you and abandon you. This wasn't abstract, it was personal. 2008 financial crisis and war profiteering becomes visible. While millennials were graduating, enlisting, burying friends, accumulating debt, they watched banks get bailed out, corporations protected, defense contractors profit, wealth transfer upward. No bankers jailed, no war architects punished, no institutional accountability. This confirmed a core millennial conclusion: the system protects itself, not the people. The integration realized. By their late 20s, millennials had learned through direct pattern recognition. Government narratives are strategic, intelligence agencies are political tools, media is not neutral, wars are economic engines, soldiers are expendable, trauma is externalized onto citizens. Accountability is performative. This is why millennials research obsessively, cross-check sources, distrust three-letter agencies, resist blind patriotism, value lived testimony over official statements. This is not paranoia, it is earned skepticism. Why millennials turned inward instead of revolutionary. After witnessing failed wars, broken veterans, state-sanctioned deception, corporate capture, and moral incoherence, Millennials did not revolt loudly, they withdrew strategically. They decided if institutions lie, I will verify. If power exploits, I will disengage. If truth is buried, I will dig. This is why millennials distrust authority reflexively. Sovereignty is internal, not institutional. Systems are bypassed, not confronted. Truth is crowdsourced, not broadcast. U.S. prison population growth. So, yes, I took criminal justice in college and studied the system once again and was pretty upset and saw parallels. I absolutely love studying systems, and anywhere you put me, I'm going to figure out what is going on, and it's extremely frustrating. And no, I'm not a person that believes in burn it all down. I understand we are all human and nothing is perfect. But in the same breath, there are so many parallels. It is really wild. And you start to see the truth behind what we are told. So, U.S. prison population growth, prison boom. The dramatic expansion of incarceration in the U.S. wasn't a single moment, it was a decades long policy trajectory. The imprisonment rate in the U.S. began dramatically increasing in the 1970s with the escalation of the war on drugs and tougher sentencing laws, and continued growing rapidly through the 1980s and the 1990s. Between 1985 and 1995, U.S. prison populations grew by about 8% per year on average as mandatory minimum sentencing and other punitive policies took hold. By 2008, federal and state correctional authorities had jurisdiction over about 1.6 million people, a dramatic rise from previous decades. In 2008 to 2009, the total incarcerated population peaked at over 2.3 million people, roughly 1% of the adult population, before decarceration efforts began to slowly reduce numbers in the following decade. This period coincided with policy shifts that treated drug offenses as criminal matters rather than public health issues, fueling incarceration for addiction-related offenses without addressing underlying trauma or rehabilitation. God, this hits me so hard. I've seen so many people in my personal life struggle with PTSD and drug addictions, and I'm very aware that we all have our own choices. I've been sober for 17 years now, 17 years now. And I had to drop a lot of people out of my life. And so, yes, I am very, very, it's been a long personal journey. And I do still hold people dear to my heart and prayers. It's just very sad that people go down this road for multitudes of reasons. It just really hits my heart. So I just wanted to talk about it. So this period, okay, yes. All right. So the opioid crisis timeline. The US opioid epidemic also emerged alongside the millennial experience of war and systemic collapse. The modern opioid crisis began in the mid to late 1990s when prescription opioid painkillers started being widely prescribed, in part driven by pharmaceutical marketing and changes in pain management practices. Overdose deaths involving prescription opioids increased steadily through the 2000s. And by around 2011, the crisis was widely recognized and characterized as a national epidemic. As prescription opioids became harder to obtain, heroin use and later fentanyl and synthetic opioid deaths surged in the 2010s, carrying the crisis well into the millennial adult years. This timeline overlaps with the peak of the prison boom and the deployment of large numbers of millennial age service members, situating the opioid crisis as a parallel health and social collapse for a generation already strained by institutional failures. The veteran health system failures, VA access crisis. I will never, ever forget any of this, ever. Problems with veterans' access to care became a major public scandal in the early 2010s. In 2014, widespread reports emerged that veterans faced extensive wait times for medical care at Veterans Health Administration VA facilities. Investigations highlighted that veterans died while waiting for appointments, which ultimately forced the resignation of the VA secretary that year. I literally still have papers on papers highlighted. Research is from years ago. I still have it. It really truly is insane. Really. I truly feel like I'm not really closing a chapter, but wow. Circling back around. All right, so this revelation was not isolated. It reflected years of systemic backlog, underfunding, and mismanagement that disproportionately affected veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, many of whom struggle with both physical and psychological wounds and found inadequate support upon returning home. How these timelines intersect. All right, so mid 1990s, millennial phase, adolescence, early teens, crisis trend, opioid prescribing boom begins, 2001, young adulthood for the millennial phase, 9/11 and global threat imprint, 2000s, early adulthood, opioid overdose trend grows, 2008, college early career, prison population peaks, 2010 to 2014, young adulthood. Opioid shift. I don't know if I can say that on here without getting. I'm going to not say that again, I suppose. So opioids shift to harder drugs. I'm not sure what gets I don't know what gets you in trouble on here on YouTube. So anyways, VA weight scandal, 2010s, adulthood, veterans face care delays, prisons remain high. These overlapping crises weren't discrete. Millennials lived through simultaneous structural breakdowns in public health, criminal justice, and veteran care systems once thought reliable. It feels so good to get this information out. That's why the millennial generation authority structures lost credibility long before it was fashionable to distrust them. Trust was not disproven in theory, it was disproven in lived experience. Systems failed large groups of people in parallel ways. Veterans, incarcerated individuals, and addicts, revealing patterns of neglect rather than isolated problems. The return that never came. Veterans, prisoners, and the failure of reintegration. This is what drove me the most absolutely crazy. I've always been into psychology and spirituality and trying to understand better ways to help human beings integrate pain and become better versions of themselves holistically. So here we go. By the late 2000s, as millennials entered college, something unsettling became impossible to ignore. The war was still happening overseas, but its consequences were already everywhere at home. Classrooms filled with discussions of criminal justice, psychology, and social systems began to reveal an uncomfortable truth. The same institutions claiming to protect society were incapable of restoring the people they consumed. Whether the uniform was military issued or prison issued, the pattern was strikingly similar. There was no true transition back into civilian life. Veterans returned from Iraq and Afghanistan not as heroes welcomed into community, but as liabilities shuffled into bureaucratic corridors. Many had followed orders faithfully, endured prolonged exposure to violence, moral contradiction, and fear. only to come home and discover that the country they served had no ritual, language, or infrastructure to receive them. Mental health care existed in theory, but not in practice. Appointments were delayed for months. Trauma was flattened into diagnosis. Moral injury, the quiet devastation of having participated in something that violated one's inner compass, was rarely acknowledged at all. Instead, veterans were handed prescriptions and told to wait. So they did what humans have always done when pain is unseen. They self medicated. I'm starting to choke up a little bit. Everyone makes their own decisions. I almost went into the Marines and took a different path in life. I was really into the physical training of it all, but I definitely don't want to be told what to do. And I still feel so deeply. Opioids, benzodiazepines, and alcohol, substances filled the vacuum where meaning, integration, and communal witnessing should have lived. The same soldiers trained to survive chaos were left alone with memories they were never taught how to metabolize. Strength was expected, struggle was pathologized, and the system quietly moved on. At the same time, millennials studying criminal justice noticed an eerie parallel unfolding inside prisons. Incarceration was not rehabilitative, it was instructional. Prisons did not heal psychological wounds or address the roots of harm. They taught survival, hierarchy, dominance, and emotional suppression. Inmates learned how to become better criminals, not healthier humans. There was no spiritual reckoning, no psychological reintegration, no meaningful transition back into society. Just release and pills and stigma. Jails were paid for bodies. Occupancy mattered more than outcome. Like war, incarceration generated revenue for facilities, contractors, pharmaceuticals, and entire local economies. Healing, once again, was not merely absent, it was economically inconvenient. The realization hit hard for millennials paying attention. Veterans and prisoners were not failures of the system, they were products of it. Different entry points, same destination. Both populations experienced identity rupture, prolonged exposure to coercive authority, loss of autonomy, moral injury, and abandonment at the point of no return. In both cases, society offered no bridge back to wholeness, only chemical compliance and endless waiting. Millennials recognized something ancient had been lost. Historically, warriors were not discarded upon return. They were cleansed, witnessed, and reintegrated. Communities understood that violence changes the soul, and that restoration required time, ritual, and collective responsibility. Modern systems replaced this wisdom with paperwork and pills. The absence of spiritual and psychological transition created a pressure cooker. Trauma that had nowhere to go migrated inward into addiction, depression, rage, numbness, and disconnection. Veterans cycled through emergency rooms and VA waitlists. Former inmates returned to neighborhoods unequipped to hold them. Families absorbed the fallout. Children grew up inside unresolved war. This is another reason why I study astrology and psychology so absolutely obsessively and deeply, because understanding yourself on the deepest of layers truly helps integration. And it's just been a lifelong journey for me with this. I truly care about people deeply, and it certainly helps understanding yourself. And it's just extremely sad that we are not taught the most important things in life. And it's understandable. I mean, why would they teach that in public schooling, you know? Anywho, So, this is where millennials learn deeply and irreversibly that authority does not equal care. They watched institutions speak the language of service while abandoning those who served. They saw moral injury renamed as disorder, accountability replaced by sedation, and suffering managed rather than transformed. The war did not end when troops came home. It simply changed form. It entered bodies, it entered relationships, it entered prisons, it entered addiction statistics and suicide rates. And millennials studying this not as theory but as lived reality reached a quiet conclusion. If systems cannot help people return to themselves, then obedience is not virtue. This is why millennials question authority reflexively. This is why institutional trust collapsed so completely. This is why meaning matters more than instruction. They are not cynical because they are lazy or entitled. They are skeptical because they watched entire generations processed as expendable cogs, useful in crisis and disposable in the aftermath. The final lesson of the millennial war era was not about violence. It was about what happens when societies forget how to bring people home. The core pattern I identified: no right of return, no psychological reintegration, only management. Both veterans and incarcerated people experience extreme identity rupture, exposure to violence, coercive hierarchies, a loss of agency, hyper-vigilance as a survival adaptation, and moral injury, even when actions were legal or ordered. And then the system says, okay, you're back, function with no transition container. Prison system equals criminal skill factory, not rehabilitation. Prisons are not designed to heal. And I understand we all make our own decisions. I understand. I know where your mind is going. It's, hard to feel for people who choose to do, the wrong things in life. But I am extremely empathetic and I do still care. And so that is why I am going over this so deeply. I've always truly cared. So, prisons are not designed to heal, they are designed to warehouse, extract funding, and maintain throughout. Inmates are grouped with more sophisticated criminals, gang hierarchies, and survival based dominance structures. So instead of accountability, psychological repair, spiritual awakening, and skill building for civilian life, they learn better criminal networking, deeper distrust, and sharper antisocial adaptation. Because the environment rewards those traits. That's not accidental, that's design. When funding is tied to occupancy, healing becomes a threat to the business model. Veterans, same failure, different uniform. Now map that directly onto vets. Extreme conditioning, high adrenaline, command-based identity, moral ambiguity, and trauma. Then suddenly bureaucracy, waiting list, paperwork, dismissal, here's a pill. No decompression, meaning making, reintegration ritual, or acknowledgement of moral injury. So what happens? Self-medication, substance abuse, rage turned inward, depression, slewer slides. I probably can't say that word on here. And opioids filling the gap where community and meaning should have been. Again, not personal failure. Systemic negligence. Criminals are just a cog in the machine. Veterans are just a cog in the machine. Different labels, same treatment. Both are monetized populations, managed, not healed, processed, not understood, useful only while producing value, labor, war, incarceration stats. Once usefulness ends, discard, delay, and numb. Why millennials saw this before others? Because millennials were watching this happen in real time, seeing friends come home broken, seeing mass incarceration normalized, studying criminal justice during peak prison expansion, living through the opioid explosion inside these systems. You weren't radical, you were observant. And crucially, you were not yet numbed enough to accept it as normal. The deeper layer we are touching: Both systems lack a sacred transition. Ancient cultures always had rites of return for warriors, cleansing rituals, communal witnessing, and reintegration ceremonies. Modern systems replace that with medication, isolation, punishment, and paperwork. That creates permanent limbo humans, which then feeds crime, addiction, recidivism, I can't say that, slewer slide, and generational trauma. And the system says, see, they're broken. When really the bridge was never built. I wasn't just studying criminal justice. I was studying failed initiation systems in a late stage industrial society. All right, so now we're going to get into politics and authority. Geez, I'm already at 40 minutes. So, yeah, I am going to cap this video here. Take a quick break and go on with politics and authority. So I definitely feel better getting all of that out of my system. It was pretty cool going through my old college research papers. It brought me back to the good old times. um yeah, I've just always researched my own way, and I really don't care what people think. I care about facts. And yeah, that brought me back to some good times. Researching, anyways, uncovering truths, not necessarily good times. I was younger, and not many people could see what I was seeing, and it was honestly very frustrating. So I decided not to get into criminal justice and decided to veer away from different careers and got into accounting and sat behind the screen in a not dealing with all these failed systems, in my opinion. But here I am. I think this is where I really, this is like my soul work here. I am my own boss, which is great. I'm creating my own astro-psychological system, and yeah, it's I can say what I want to say. I'm not constrained. So anyways, this goes out to you, my dear friend. I will never ever ever forget you, what you've been through. I am proud of you for overcoming. I pray that you stay on the sober path, the healthier path, the best version of yourself path. I lost a lot of friends back in my younger teen years. Many people overdosed, and yeah, crazy times. Um, yeah, it definitely brings a lot up going back in history here. So, anywho, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe. Certainly feel free to comment your thoughts and feelings on this topic, and I will see you in the next video.